things over to get things underway. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone in person and online for joining us. I'm gonna just ask each speaker to introduce themselves as they take their turn speaking, so we don't do a round of introductions and use up 5 minutes of our precious 40. My name is Meredith Jacob. I'm a lawyer at American University's Washington College of Law, where I talk to folks about copyright, open licensing, and OER. And the focus of this session, even though it has AI in the title, is not to talk about the nuts and bolts of using AI in teaching and learning. It's to talk about sort of what the big systemic choices about AI implementation are and what the ways to think about the opportunities and risks posed as AI changes a lot of parts of the education and information ecosystem. So what are the changes that we think are going to happen for better or for worse over the next 5 years? And what is the positive agenda for folks in the OER community over the course of those changes? So what are the ways to protect the OER systems that we have in place? What are the ways to take advantage of new tools and new technologies? And then what are the other sort of market or system changes that we need to be present in the sort of advocacy and policymaking spaces for during that time? And so I'm going to ask each of our presenters to give their sort of brief 5-minute risk and opportunity hot takes. This is a hot take session, get excited. And then we're going to hope to hold a fair amount of time for presentation from the audience. I'll also say that it's sort of bad pedagogy to say sit in silence for 25 minutes and hold your questions for the end. So if you have questions, either online or in person, please go ahead and raise your hand and jump in as soon as you have them, so that we're not just talking at you for 25 or 30 minutes. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague online, Will Cross. Oh, sorry, perfect. Perfect. I had to word it right.
Hi, everyone. If you're coming in, welcome, sit down. My name is Apurva Ashok. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an immigrant settler from Bangalore, but I work in Toronto, or you might know it as Toronto. I'm the executive director of the Rebus Foundation, which was actually founded by Hugh. And as Silver Moon mentioned this morning, right before the keynote, we're here today on Narragansett land. I'm learning all about Providence and Rhode Island. I was really pleasantly surprised to learn that the motto of the state is hope. I'm going to hold on to that. And I'm also going to invite you all to continue to, again, understand what are the other messages from the land and from the communities that are traditional caretakers of this land. Think about that over the next 3 days, in addition to things like AI, which we'll get into. I'm just grateful to be visiting here and learning from all of you and community members. And I will say this acknowledgement of sorts is just one of many ways that I commit to reconciliation work and decolonization in my own practice. And I'm hoping that you will see that in our interactions, you'll see that in the conversations to come. Okay. Hot takes. I think Will and Meredith were asking us to talk about what we're most excited by and maybe something that is worrying us. When it comes to just the topic of AI and OER in general, something that I'm actually quite excited by is what feels like the return of curiosity with educators. I see Liza in the audience. She's someone who is doing a lot of research and experimentation and innovation around OER, pedagogy, artificial intelligence. It feels like, in a way, the bounds of our imagination is getting challenged, but as we're thinking about, what kind of prompts to use, what kind of outputs are being generated, and there's really more space for us to dream again. That's obviously all with a caveat. I think take all of that excitement with a grain of salt. What I think really needs more advocacy, or what is worrying is, everything from the ethics of consumption and usage, the lack of guides and guardrails at various levels for all of us. How some of these tools and data sets reinforce, I think, very colonial views of the world. And maybe also is this a shift to further privatize the university and institution? In spaces what it already feels quite privatized for some of us. And you know, is the core value of what we're doing shifting with the tools and the platforms that are trying to really urgently push for AI. I have a lot more things that I will probably be worrying about, but Meredith, I'm gonna pause and say, should I pass it to Will or Karen? Karen,
So Karen is,
Okay.
yes, going to introductions.
lovely. Karen, who are you? And then you tell us your hot takes.
Thanks, Apurva. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Lauritsen. I'm with the Open Education Network, and my primary role there is to support people involved in the creation and sharing of open textbooks. So I wholeheartedly agree with everything Apurva said, and will add to, you know, one of the things she said she was excited about. And as a former teacher who I admit sometimes misses working more closely with students, I'm really excited about some of the assignments that I've heard faculty and instructors creating for their students to evaluate and consider AI, and how these teach critical thinking skills and really lead to meaningful conversations. And it's the meaningful conversations that I think is one of the most positive things that has come so far. I'm very excited by how engaged we are in these questions. I'm excited, of course, about the potential to easily translate learning materials, to create tailor-made materials, that AI can do things that many of us don't want to do, like drafting learning outcomes for a conference proposal, for example, or synthesize a bunch of data. Like there's so many things in medicine about improving patient diagnosis and treatment that I think is really incredible. And so when I'm feeling fearful, I try not to like just blanket all of AI with my fear, and remember, like, there are incredible opportunities here in so many different fields. And so just like we're doing in this moment, we've really been engaging with the community and one another on how we want to navigate this. And I think that that is really inspiring to me. In one of the sessions we held, I think it was a tea time with the OEN, people said they were conflicted, curious, cautious. They chose the alliteration, and excited, which is scared and excited together. And so I think with all of the feelings that I have and that we have collectively, the way that we comfort each other and really kind of ask these questions together can really be comforting in an alienating landscape. Meredith's questions and the session description talks a lot about subscription models and how we might be able to address those. And maybe that's what we'll get to in the conversation, but I'm excited to talk about that. In terms of what I'm worried about, you know, I just feel like we've got a hamster wheel vibe permeating our lives. It's just like what modern life feels like. Sometimes I just think like we're all madly creating and digesting content, and for what? To tick a box? Like, what is this box? Who made the box? Who's benefiting from the box? Is this box adding value to our lives? Like, let's just step back and ask this question and think about like how we need to be creating content all the time. And do we want to be creating it as humans, and how we want this AI piece to fit in? Why, as a human, would I want to read something that another human didn't take the time to write? You know, just sorting through all of these perhaps more existential questions. I'm, of course, concerned about the continued stratification of the educational landscape. Some people get to learn with humans, some people get the highest quality content, and some people maybe will get to learn with AI and something that got cobbled together and maybe was not as carefully reviewed by a human expert. I'm also worried about continued or growing emphasis on vocational training in higher education without a more foundational understanding of what it means to be a human in a society with other humans. I think these questions are really important to keep at the core of our conversation as we figure out not only these questions about subscription services and the role of AI in education, but just what this means for us as we sort of venture into this brave new world, and how we do so in a way that doesn't feel like we're on a runaway train. And that's one reason why I opened with my appreciation and enthusiasm for this community, and that we can turn to each other, ask these questions, and I think really be mindful about where it is we want to go and how we want to try and do it, because I think we're really up against it. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks everybody for being here. I'm starting to notice a trend, which I saw in my own sort of thinking about excitement piece and anxiety piece, which is that as I was thinking about what I was excited about, I saw a lot of anxiety creeping in. And as I was thinking about my anxiety, I was seeing a lot of excitement creeping in as well. So I think I forgot to say, I'm Will Cross. I direct a thing called the Open Knowledge Center at North Carolina State University, and I'm really glad to be here today to share a couple things that I'm thinking about. The thing that I am excited about, tinged with a little anxiety potentially, is the opportunity to sort of reinvigorate open by exposing some of the legal and pedagogical tensions that have always been at the heart of open education. So if you have followed the news at all in any way, shape, or form recently, you probably have seen stories about big publishers like Taylor and Francis using the resources that they have to train on AI. And the framing is very often, scholars are shocked that this is happening, that a big publisher would do something so commercially driven without any input from the authors. And as somebody who spends a lot of my days haranguing people about authors' rights and reading your publication agreements, the initial response is sometimes like, yes, duh, that's why we bother you all day to read those publication agreements and think about those things. And I think the kinder and smarter response to that is, great. I'm so happy to have you on this team now, right? Something I'm really excited about is that those questions about authors' rights and privacy and platformization that the title points to have been brought into such stark relief that we all hopefully will be in a space that we're excited about talking about those things in a real way. Similarly, Karen, a lot of the pedagogical things that I think open pedagogy folks have been focused on have been brought into sharp relief. If one of the banes of the undergraduate's existence is, here's a thing you could answer well in 4 sentences, why don't you write 20 pages about it? Sort of as, volume as proxy for understanding or knowledge. I have a machine that can instantaneously produce 20 pages. Let's find a better way to evaluate my understanding. The opportunity to respond to the problems in the system that AI lays bare. I also have a lot to say about the way we often use a certain white upper middle class USian English as a proxy for intelligence, as opposed to somebody where English isn't their first language, or maybe they even have like a Southern dialect or something. So the ability for AI to push back and say, no, that's easy, that's not a proxy for anything, but having access to ChatGPT, we've got to do a better job with pedagogy. That's really, really exciting because it's necessary work, and it's the work that in open education we've been focused on doing really well for a long time. In terms of advocacy, I want to share a quick story I heard from another educator working with AI that's represented in this picture here. As she told it, this image is from a TikTok video that went viral during the polar vortex. And it was a person that said, you want to know how cold it is up here in Canada during the polar vortex? And she took a kettle of boiling water and she poured it in a spiral, and it made this ice spiral there. And the next day, she said, actually, there's something else I need to tell you. That's not how ice works anywhere in the world. This is not how anything works. I used AI to make this stuff. Let me tell you how I did it and why I did it, so you can understand and sort of have more competency around the way AI can, as she says, make the impossible possible, but also to bring a critical lens to that stuff. That's a neat story. The part that was really striking to me is in the comments. One of the first comments was, I totally believed it because I've never seen snow. I didn't have the context to evaluate whether that was credible in the first place or not. And so the thing that I am anxious about, the thing that I think needs advocacy, is something that Meredith and I have others have heard in the focus groups we've been doing, is that AI is really, really good for sparking or supplementing or supporting experts in a space. And it's really, really crap for use when people don't have the context to vet what comes out of it, right? It's a great tool for some uses and it's a really bad tool for other uses. So if like me, you think of AI in 2024 as sort of like Wikipedia in 2003, this sort of misunderstood thing that's more about potential than what it is, the thing I think needs advocacy is making sure people understand this thing accurately, not sort of polemically, and that we work to push pedagogies that make the good stuff happen and push back against the potentially bad stuff. So those are the sort of mixed things that I've been thinking about in this space. And I'm super excited to turn it over to Hugh and hear what you've been thinking about.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Hugh. I'm the founder of Pressbooks. I'm the co-founder of Rebus Foundation, and I recently stepped down as CEO of Pressbooks, and I've been working on AI stuff in education. So I am going to be really short. I think all these things are good things to be excited about or worried about. The things I'm excited about is how amazing AI is at doing wonderful things, including when used properly in pedagogy, being an amazing tool for student learning. It's probably across AI, there's wonderful, wonderful things. And can be, if we think about how the pedagogy is wrapped around it, a real huge, powerful tool for advancing how well people learn and how engaged they are with what they're learning. So that's hugely exciting. What I worry about, I think, are two things. One is that the higher education universe is so stressed, there's so many different stressors on it that it's very hard to make time and space for people to figure out how to make this change towards new pedagogy. That makes me very nervous. And I think a second thing I think was raised, but I'll just reinforce it, is this idea that as the places where the use of AI is used to forward learning in powerful ways happens, and maybe in some places it's not happening, that there's going to be an increasing, we're seeing this all across society anyway, but increasing stratification of who's getting access to the best and most powerful learning and who's not. That goes into platform questions, goes into a whole host of questions. But in any case, in short, exciting, super excited about the ways we can teach better using AI as part of how we're thinking about teaching, worried about who's getting access to the best teaching, how much that is going to increase stratification.
Thank you. So I'm Meredith Jacob, or introduce myself. I've worked with Will over the past 4 or 5 months to conduct a series of focus groups with educators about AI. There's a couple of you here have attended those. I think the things that I'm most excited about coming out of those are 3 big things. One, AI is a really awful substitute for subject matter expertise, right? But it is actually a pretty decent substitute in many situations for technical expertise. So one of the debates you see around whether or not AI is useful is people come in and go, well, you could write a program to do that. That's not new, but most people can't. They either can't technologically or they can't because they don't have the money. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting projects where AI has taken people with a good idea and an interesting resource and provided basically this gap filling for technological expertise or technological resources. There's a really interesting program out of Kennesaw State that is using an AI tool to basically surface like narrative historical information out of an oral history archive of student civil rights activists in the 50s and 60s. And anyone who's ever done oral history work knows that it is like very hard, very technical work. And this is a way for those pieces of historical truth to be available to undergraduate students who aren't gonna do extensive oral history research. And I think that's a really interesting way to bridge that technical skill gap to do that. I also think that we see it potentially making a lot of strides, if correctly implemented, in making materials more available for students who are neurodivergent. So Will said earlier that one of the key things we test in American education is what do you signify with your spoken and written English? I think the other thing we tested is like, what is your executive function and focus for doing long, boring stuff that you just don't wanna do? Like, how many times can you force yourself back to that problem set? There's a reason I'm not a PhD chemist, and it may have something to do with that. But I would say that I think potentially designed well, there is this sort of tutorial partner project, and being like, well, what would another sentence about that look like? Or well, what would the first thing you're gonna say be? And so I'm really excited about those potentials. I'm really worried, like Hugh, about this being a tool for stratification. So in my positive agenda for the implementation of AI, it's pushing tech companies as hard as we possibly can for things like site licensing and institutional purchasing agreements that make it available, like internet access, where universities have to pay for it, but it's available at a reasonable bulk rate, and not like ebooks, where we cannot buy them at any price institutionally. That's a huge deal, right? Like, when you look at students in high school or college, do you divide them up between people who have the current premium license and the people who don't? So I think that if we are gonna use these tools, having real meaningful equal access is important, and I'm really worried about creating basically a future where we have like the rich kid internet and the poor kid internet, where some people have better access to information around the world around them because they can pay. Say what you will about the sort of mediocre state of Google right now, but everybody gets the same basic information when they run a Google search. There's some sort of geo-based stuff around the edges, but the core thing is really the same. And I really worry about having this bifurcation of access to information. The other thing I really worry about is platforms and subscriptions and the sort of quasi-monopoly tying of the content to the assessment tools, to the student support tools, in a way that really risks sidelining OER and sort of building this comprehensive both teacher and student sort of surveillance and tracking and grading and assessment into one sort of blob. So I think those are the risks and benefits I see. We have some space for discussion among the panelists, but I want to open it up for first thoughts or questions from the crowd as well. And I'm going to repeat your questions or your comments just so that people online can hear them.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love hot takes from thoughtful people. It's really great. I noticed this morning, hold on, Liza. Oh, my, sorry. Thanks. Thank you. I noticed this morning in our really great keynote on anti-racism that when we were talking about spaces for resistance, nobody stood up and talked about AI. And I was hoping maybe you all could comment on what resistance looks like with generative artificial intelligence. Meredith, you might have just hit on some of this.
I don't know that I have a one-stop hot take for that, but I will let my panelists think about it. I do think for me, we're at this moment, we're at the sort of end of the beginning of the open internet. So like the internet became like Google search, and the internet was sort of open by a collection of mistakes. There was a lot of early original government funding. It was a relatively small technological problem at first. Like there weren't billions of websites when we first made the decision that search and internet was going to be free. It was a much smaller problem. And then we had this, turns out to be entirely incorrect optimism about the ad supported revenue. And so those three things came in, and sort of by accident, the internet was free. And so I think the real the both threat and question here is how much does meaningful access to information stay free, or how much does it become this sort of bifurcated subscription-based thing? We're already seeing this in search engines. There's a recent deal that like only Google can index Reddit for the first 4 days or 7 days. And so I think this really worrisome outcome is different subscription-based pots for different information about the world. So that I think is actually the core question and opportunity here. Other people online on the panel?
I think one of the things that's interesting about a lot of the models, if you're talking specifically about sort of how the models behave and how they reflect different kind of cultural inputs. The interesting thing is if you are working with a ChatGPT or whatever, and prompting it correctly, it actually does interesting jobs of raising these issues. And so part of it is about training ourselves about how we can train our students to be using these things in ways where we're interrogating those kinds of questions. And in fact, again, the sorts of things that these tools are fantastic at is helping people think from different perspectives. So I think in that sense, there's a positive there as well as perhaps some worries.
There's a question online, following up and saying they're concerned with what happened during the pandemic, where lots of ed tech tools were free and drew users in. And then once folks were sort of settled in that use case, it became paid. And so I think that's a really important question here as people start to adopt and use and rely on AI tools. You know, what are the questions about like data portability? What other sort of freedoms and terms would you want so that if a contract became too expensive or if the terms around privacy became too onerous, that you could leave and pick a different tool? Those questions about competition and access. Oh, Karen, did you, sorry. Karen, did you have your mic unmuted?
I was not going to add to that part of the conversation. I was distracted by the chat. That's always the challenge in these calls, right? I'm trying to listen and trying to read. So if I miss something, let me know. But I was reading Amber's comment, which I think Meredith, you just summarized and addressed, and then Jonathan's comment following up on the keynote. And yeah,
could one of you read Jonathan's comment for the audience here?
sure. Jonathan Porritt says, Joy and James's keynote reminded us of Audre Lorde's famous quote, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." Jonathan says that since today's AI is absolutely the product of a few ghastly, racist, climate-denying, colonialist American tech oligarchs, I wonder how you think about using this tool of today's masters in our work in open education.
That's a question. I love that.
I take that one.
Yes, it is.
So had a few conversations about this and you know, one of the questions that we always have to ask is what are we trying to achieve with the things that we're doing? What are we really trying to do? And maybe I'm less radical than Jonathan. But I think, you know, our as teachers, the thing that we want most is our students to learn most effectively and learn in powerful ways. And so I think, you know, I keep going back to that as a central thing. And the question to me is, how can this thing be used in ways to help that happen? So that's kind of my answer. That I think if we don't use all the tools at our disposal to help students learn better, then this there. And I think, again, I see huge amounts of powerful ways that this can help students learn.
I'd also like to underline, Ash offered a comment in chat as well that I thought was useful. The question is, I wonder if, quote, the master's tools here is really the particular companies or tools rather than the AI itself. Can we create our own tools using AI? So are the master's tools here large corporations or neoliberalism or something? And it's a mistake to say, well, the master has, you know, indoor plumbing, so no indoor plumbing for us. So really being intentional about what's the poisoned apple here and what's the part that it might be useful. So I appreciate Ash sharing that comment.
So my question pushes on this point a little bit, and you're all involved in connecting with communities of practice of educators to get them to think about knowledge infrastructures in critical ways. So I'm curious how within that process you're thinking critically about the ecological impact of AI and the labor politics specifically. How do you do that with faculty, with educators at scale in a way that still keeps possibility alive, but has a real kind of honest, clear eye on the risks.
So I can just speak to some of the early work we've done on this, which is thinking about when you're using a tool that is scoped to purpose. So many of the large general purpose AI tools are both less regulated from a labor standpoint and more resource intensive from a climate standpoint than smaller purpose built tools. And so for me, I think one of the questions is, in what ways we're just actually evaluating which tool is used for which purpose, and not sort of, it's like, you know, not firing up the F-350 to go like run an errand downtown. And just making sure that you're actually not using the sort of large off-the-shelf intensive tools if they're not the right tool for the purpose. And I think investing in meaningful open alternatives.
One of the questions, if I may, in the description for this session was, as the shift to subscription models accelerates and as platforms, tools, and content are tied together, how do we prevent OER from being excluded? And I'm not clear on the value of including OER in a subscription model. In perhaps an alternate universe, I wonder what it would look like if one of OER's strengths could be existing outside of that model. Subscriptions, of course, are such a way of life for us now. We've implicitly agreed and explicitly agreed to many of these models. But I think going back to Jonathan's point, maybe we don't buy into the model, but we create another one and think about, you know, how human-centered we want to be in our practices.
Yeah, I want to build on that, Karen, and just say that the sort of weird anxiety-filled optimism that I expressed in my comment a minute ago is exactly that. This may be a moment to say maybe the problem here is the bundling and the platformization and subscription models. And by taking us to a point where people are shocked, yay shocked, that a large for-profit corporation is for-profiting, maybe this can be a wedge to say, you know, let's not see how we can smash these two things together, but say like, yeah, this is really a problem. We need to, you know, put our openness front and center as we think about what AI is for, rather than putting AI front and center as we think about what openness is for.
I'm Kurt Newton from MIT, building on the previous thread about purpose-built models and the goodness of having something well-tuned to the use. I'm particularly concerned about having things that will work for people who are not well internet connected. How wonderful it is to have our old school OERs that you can literally print out and carry around in your back pocket. And that sort of mode of use being so important for many people around the world. What sort of commitment might we need to make together to really drive to have these models that you can download and run on your phone that work effectively for these kind of learning modalities?
Do you want to ask your question and we get into the two together?
It's different.
Okay, well, my short response to that is we need more people who are really technologists first OER people second in this conversation. You know, there are a lot of opinions about the sort of use and implementation, but we still spend a lot of time, I think, arguing about just different perceptions of the facts. And so I think getting folks who are in a university, not in a industry technology standpoint in, does really differentiate. You'll hear radically different versions of what is possible in terms of model building, in terms of like just the very basics of like how easy or hard is it to do this specific thing. And so I think one of the things, if OER is going to grapple with this seriously, is building some strong technologist partnerships to really think about those questions.
Okay, Jasmine Roberts Cruz. I have a lot of thoughts. So I know the title of this is a positive agenda, and I want to be, you know, I'm an optimistic person, all that good stuff. And I think it's hard for me to really be invested in a positive agenda for AI because I'm still grappling with how does AI, for me, equity and justice have to be at the core if we want a positive agenda for AI. And I'm not quite seeing that. And I think sometimes we have these conversations about AI, it's approached, you know, from a standpoint of fear, people who are quote unquote anti-AI. And that's not actually what I'm saying. I'm truly interested in how, is there a justice and equity agenda for AI? Is that even possible? And when we say that we're trying to use AI to, enhance access for students, well, what kind of student are we actually talking about? And again, for what purpose? Are we talking about the student who's in the global south? Are we talking about the student who's in the rural US South, right? And so these are the questions that I still have. I don't think AI is gonna solve all these very complex questions. But from an educator standpoint, who is justice and equity oriented, it's hard for me to get excited about AI when it's not addressed in that capacity. So I hate to bring down the positive.
So I was laughing because I said positive as a lawyer, so I didn't mean happy.
See?
I just know what we want. So I
Okay,
think,
thank you
like,
for clarifying that.
my whole take from this is that we have to focus at least on like what our demands are of these implementations of the policies. A positive agenda, just in the sense of what we want. So like for me, a positive agenda point is you have to have, like institution or community-wide pricing for AI tools if you're gonna allow them to be used in education. If you're gonna use them, there has to be a model that means every student has access. And that's a positive agenda piece, because it's a thing we want,
Right.
even though it's not like, it's great.
Yes.
So like positive for a very lawyerly version.
I see.
Positive.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes. Being positive, not cheerful positive.
Yeah.
I think we have 3.5 minutes, so let's talk fast.
No pressure.
So we're, I think this is still connecting with resistance, but I think from a slightly different angle. So I work with Liza, same institution, we'll talk more about this tomorrow in our presentation, but we're starting to survey students and faculty about these tools, and we're trying to track, kind of get a her pulse on like, hey, where are students at, where faculty at. And I think something that we're seeing that is unique about AI implementation is the ick factor. And I think it's hard to, it seems like it's touching on something that is, I guess you could use the moral matrix lens or whatever to think about moral foundations. But it's bringing together unusual coalitions, not just progressive or conservative coalitions, but probably there's another axis going on where people are like, hey, this is weird. I don't want this in my education. I don't want to see this. I want to be around it. And so part of me is trying to think, 5 years, 10 years ahead. Are we going to be building is there going to be a demand for off ramps? And what's the role of OER and other technologies and providing these spaces for people like, hey, I just want out, right?
I'll let other panelists of mine jump into that. One I think is that OER is at least in most situations platform agnostic. So you can be using it in your AI tool and you're like, oh God, this is awful. You can keep the content and leave the tool. And so I hope that's one opportunity. Folks online, Will, Karen, folks in the room, if you want to respond, and then I'll read a few last questions and we'll wrap up. So there's some questions in the chat about funding, about subscription models, including AI. I think there's a question of like how our organization is funded. Our organization is funded through grants, so we have no business model except convincing our vendors we're interested. Has its own perils. And then questions about whether you want OER in subscription models. And I think there's a big difference between whether or not you want OER to be sort of subsumed into the corpus of subscriptions, about which people, I think, justifiably push back. But then separately, I think you do absolutely want to be able to use subscription tools against any content, including OER, not just the content that is sold with that subscription. So I think we were talking about the subscription model and content tying. It wasn't so much pulling OER into that, but saying, you can pay for the tool, but still use content that is free and that you have control over the content of. So unfortunately, we have been given the very gentle stop sign. Hopefully we can continue this in coffee and in lunch and in possibly even a drink. We'll be around, I know my colleagues here will be, and I have contact information for Will and Karen if anyone wants to connect with them online. Thanks so much.